Well, I have 16 years in the casino business. I was a dealer for about 3 years and a pit boss for 9. The saddest thing I had witnessed happened over time. There was a genuinely nice couple that came in and played Let It Ride. The game is atrocious odds-wise, utterly boring, and I was always miserable dealing it. The woman was in her early 50s, quite overweight, and wheelchair-bound, and the husband was very thin and mousy. The husband was always the one to play, and the wife would sit behind him. They didn't even bet heavily, but they were there 7 days a week for hours and hours a day, weeks in a row. As time went on, they stopped being as nice, to the staff and to each other. They were both obviously not taking care of themselves as they had been, hygienically speaking. Eventually, one night, the husband turned around to ask the wife for more money, and she absolutely broke down in a shaking, sobbing fit, just uncontrollable, inconsolable. He was pretty demanding, and she was slow, handing over the last couple of 20s out of her purse, and she said, "Tom, this is it. If you lose this, we won't eat this month." I absolutely refused to take the money, called my supervisor over and explained the situation, and thankfully, unlike a lot of joints, they backed that decision up. That was very early on in my career, and it really hit me hard that I had taken tens of thousands of dollars from those people. If I remember right, we evicted them lifetime and connected them with the state problem gambling services. When I was a pit boss, watching a table in high limit, I saw a guy buy in for $5,000 and run it up to about $250,000 by the time I went home. Badass run. So I come back the next day at 5 p.m. and the guy is still there. Not surprising. The guy has about $125K in chips in front of him, so I say, "Oh, looks like you took a bit of a thumping while I was asleep." The pit boss I was relieving was standing off to the side making the "stop talking" gesture, so I chuckled and went over to get him relieved. Turns out, the guy had given it all back and was another $350,000 more in the hole. Probably the craziest thing I had seen in all those years was a guy, again in high limit, who got beat up all night. Just hours of getting thumped. After a particularly nasty beat on some splits and double downs, he said, "I lose one more hand, I'm shitting on the floor." I informed him that would be a super bad idea and went over to call surveillance and security. It was right at the end of the shoe, so I'm calling while the dealer is shuffling up. Security is up there close, but not too close. Surveillance is watching. First hand out of the shoe, dealer 10, peeks, and rolls over the ace for a dealer blackjack. Quicker than I could blink, the dude had his pants down grunting. Gaming Commission and security were none too happy arresting the guy, but I was entertained. I started my shift just as a regular high roller sat down at one of my tables. He lost $35,000 in the first hour. He asked for credit, but he was cut off. He found one green in his pocket and asked if he could bet 25, even though it was a $50 table. I said, yeah, just this once. I spent the rest of my shift watching him grind that $25 into $35,000. I have never and will never see a run like that again. What did he do when he got his $35,000 back after a miracle run? He said, "I'm just even. Now I have to make money," and lost that $35,000 in less than 15 minutes. Ex-Aussie dealer here. Had a semi-regular play on my table, and it was pretty much one-on-one the entire night. They had been losing, but not an astronomical amount, maybe about $5,000 loss. I hadn't seen them for about a year, but didn't think much of it because of rotating shifts, games, different areas. Got to the point in the night where the pit boss was closing, and they were pleading with my supervisor to keep the table open so they could win back some of their money. The supervisor was having none of it, with a "too bad, so sad" kind of attitude. It wasn't the best customer service, but it was the end of the night, and we had other $50 tables open that they could go to. They then asked if they could get a complimentary room, as they were one of the higher tier members, and they had dropped a bit of money. I think they assumed they had played enough to have gotten enough membership points to cover a room. Turns out they didn't, and they couldn't get a room for the night. They then break down when they realize they didn't have enough money to get a cab home. They proceeded to tell me how they excluded themselves from the casino, which explained why I hadn't seen them for a while, as well as how they had spent so much time and money going to counseling, and now they were back at the casino and so disappointed in themselves. They shared with me their legitimate fears about their 18-year-old daughter potentially picking up a gambling problem as well, because unfortunately the casino was a night-out destination at the time, so the exposure was there. They were saying all of this while crying with their heads down. The whole thing was devastating to watch, and I asked if they wanted to request gambling help. I also told my pit manager that they needed help. He just looked at them, locked up my float, and walked away. They didn't request any gambling help, and unfortunately, you couldn't exclude someone from the casino at the time unless they voluntarily requested it. I was hoping so much that they would just ask for help from the casino, but they didn't. They got up and walked away with their head down, and I think it was the last time I ever saw them. I worked surveillance at a casino for a bit. Every time someone hit a jackpot or slot machine, we'd pull up their player account. They were always, 100% of the time, down on their lifetime earnings. Even the people that won 50,000 jackpots were down. The worst I ever saw was $375,000 for the year, in July. My buddy worked security in a casino. He would tell me about having to kick people out who soiled themselves every couple weeks. Sometimes it was older folks who may suffer from incontinence, or drunk people who were too trash to even realize what they were doing. But mostly it was degenerate gamblers who felt like their machines were due any moment now, and they didn't want to risk anyone else stealing their win. I worked in the cage at the time, and a guy came up and withdrew $10,000 from his checking and went out and played. He came back in 30 minutes later and did it again. Another 30 minutes and he did it again. Came back a fourth time and then started doing cash advances against his credit cards. He goes through all of them over the next 5 to 6 hours. Right before my shift ends, he's at my window going through every card in his wallet. All of them are declining, and he asks if we offer credit, which thank God we didn't. Altogether, he probably lost a bit more than $120,000 in the night. Not the most I've seen, but he clearly couldn't afford to lose that much. I worked in the industry for 20 years. The worst addiction I saw was a woman, probably in her late 30s, who sold a boat she didn't own twice to 2 different people. This same person also was in charge of a Girl Scout fund for a trip that was planned. When the time came, there was no money left in the fund. Former addict 5 years clean here. I once had 2 doctor's appointments in the same day, but they were spaced out between 3 hours. Since I wasn't at work that day, I drove 60 miles to the casino only to lose $700 in that time frame. On the plus side, I did make it to my second appointment. If you liked listening to these, like and subscribe so you can see when we post more.